Thanks, Louise, and thanks to everybody for tuning in today. And I'm sure you're going to find the next hour or so informative, and lots of lifelong learning can take place in the next hour or so. So yeah, as Louise mentioned, I'm founder and director of Norfolk-based management consultancy, US2U Consulting Limited. Yeah, and it was quite interesting this morning to look through my accounts to actually see that, yeah, the first invoice I can trace that we paid to Cambridge Network was 2011. So it's great to be part of this network as we actually have been developing our business over the last few years. I started US2U Consulting 15 years ago, and our purpose is about working with different organisations across different sectors and different parts of the world as well, doing lots of different things to help them become more successful. So that's really what we're going to be thinking about today. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that we work across all different sectors. Some of you will recognise some of those logos. Just pulled a few logos from our testimonial page of the website. So if any of you want to find out more after the session of different things that we can do, again, do dip into the testimonial page on the US2U Consulting website. If you look at the logos at the bottom of that page, you'll also see some of the organisations and initiatives that we're linked to. So that tells you something else about our values and our purpose and so on there. So that just sort of sets the big picture in terms of US2U Consulting. Our strapline is that we guarantee to make a positive difference. So I'm sure the next hour is going to make a positive difference as we all come out of the pandemic, following the roadmap, and we have to actually sit back and review our sales and marketing strategies in terms of what's going to enable our organisations to achieve the various different business goals that we have. And so at this point, I'm delighted to hand over to Steve from US2U Consulting, who's going to take us through the thrust of the session, and look forward to questions and so on later on.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Thurlow from US2U Consulting. I'm our sales performance specialist. The purpose of this session today is to give you some ideas about what goes on in your customers' heads when they're making a complex or major buying decision. As they go through the process, as we will see, they have different needs, different requirements, and different focus at different times of the process. And the key to effective selling is to match your approach to what they need at any particular moment in time. It's pretty straightforward. It's very simple. It's a lovely model because it's a model of making any kind of major decision. So you can actually test it against your own experience as we go along to validate it or not, and hopefully it's to validate it as we go through. As Rachel has mentioned, things are in some ways very different in 2021 to what they have been in the past, but in certain ways, like in how do we go about making major decisions, what is the psychology of effective persuasion, those things have been around a long time and fortunately haven't changed that much. As we've said, there will be a chance for questions. A little bit of background about me. My background is in corporate learning and development. I worked alongside Professor Neil Rackham and his team at Huthwaite Research Group for over 25 years, working with the top two lines on that logo, most of which are names you'll probably recognise. The one you probably don't is Invista. They're a chemicals company. They have a lovely polymer product called Lycra, which I'm pretty sure you will all have heard of. The ones on the bottom line are more recent clients since I moved permanently to Norfolk, which is where I am now. Some are small international businesses like Takumi, who are influencer marketing, and Prevolution and PC Simple are local businesses, solo organisations. In the case of Prevolution, a recent startup. So my experience crosses everything from the broad corporate to the one person working in their bedroom in Sheringham. So into the presentation, let's start with what makes a major decision. As I've said, we're talking about buying decisions, but it's about any major decision that we make that has a rational basis. The first thing is there's more than one decision maker. For years and years, the number in B2B sales was 5. People are now saying that's up around 8 people involved in the decision. It can only get so big, but at the moment I can only ever see that getting larger. So lots of people are involved in the decision. Decisions aren't snap, they're not made in a moment, they take a period of time. From a selling point of view, there will be multiple points of contact, from first contact to eventually getting the order. How long that is depends very much on the market in which you operate. The longest I ever came across was a company that was selling commercial aircraft, and they had one salesperson who'd been on territory 25 years and was still waiting to make his first sale. So it says a lot about the faith of his employer, but some markets are that long. But typically, business-to-business sales cycles are 12 to 18 months. Over the last 15, 20 years, they've been getting shorter. I suspect following last year, they're going to start getting longer again, because I think people will start taking longer to make decisions. People will become more and more risk averse following pandemic. The third point down there, there are alternative solutions available. I think the important thing to say about that isn't just other people doing what you do with a different brand name. Alternative solutions are other ways of solving the problems that your solutions solve. So, for example, if an organization has a problem with a slow production line, one solution might be a faster machine. A second solution might be a different workflow pattern. A third solution might be employing more people and extending the operation of the solution. So solutions don't have to be direct competitors. There are other ways of doing the things that your customers and clients want to do. Decisions will be highly visible. The more visible the decision, the more complex it is. Again, there may be 8 or 10 people involved in making the decision, but ultimately there will probably be 1 or 2 people who will be held responsible for it. And it's their necks that are on the line if things don't go well. Decision is complex if the solution is new or untried, or if you as a supplier are new or untried. And I'm sure there are people in the room today who are developing and pioneering new solutions. Your decision making, your customers will be making a complex decision when they buy from you. Clearly, the more complex the solution, the more complex the decision. So if you have solutions that have multiple touch points, that makes it more complex. And very significantly, do nothing is a viable option. For about 40 years, about 40% of business-to-business sales campaigns have ended in a decision to buy nothing, a do nothing decision. I saw some research yesterday that said that number is now running at 50%. So it's getting higher, which doesn't surprise me. Amazingly, everybody on both sides make a huge amount of effort into a sales cycle and a buying cycle, and yet the decision is to do nothing. So if several of those conditions apply to your sales, your customers and prospects are making a complex decision. I think the important thing to point out about this slide is the one thing that's not on there is price. Price has very little to do with how complex the decision making is. Some decisions can be relatively low value and very complex. Some decisions can be incredibly high value and very simple. We talked a little bit about the aircraft industry. Companies like GE, Rolls-Royce are selling aircraft engines that cost millions and millions of pounds, but to some of their customers, they are literally a web purchase. They're a very straightforward replacement purchase of an existing product. It's very simple, it's very straightforward. Whereas in other contexts, very small, relatively inconsequential decisions in price terms can in actual fact be quite complex because they have a number of these criteria. So that's the background. And when you think about it, when you move house, when you change your career, when you decide to embark on a major research project, they are all examples of potentially complex decisions that you personally might be making. So let's start looking at what happens when people make a major buying decision. This is this thing called the buying cycle, because as it says, it's a cycle, it goes round and round. The first thing to say about the buying cycle is it's personal. Companies don't make decisions. People make decisions. There may be lots of people involved. There may be 8 or 10 people involved in any particular decision, but they are all in this process, and they all may be at different stages of this process. So, for example, if you've ever been in a situation where you're selling and you have a contact who is really excited, really keen to do business with you, and they take you or they introduce you via Zoom or via phone call to another contact, another colleague of theirs in the buying organization, who says, I'm not sure we should be doing this at all. And what you come across is a classic case of somebody who is at a different phase in the buying cycle. So what I want to do is I want to talk through each of these phases very briefly in overview, and then drill down into the three most significant ones when it comes to sales and look at what best practice looks like. So we're going to start in changes over time. And if I'd been doing this presentation 18 months ago, I would have said something like, changes over time are things that happen that we might not be aware of, that appear out of nowhere or are predictable and happen. And basically, you should, as a sales organization, be out there all the time looking for changes over time that might trigger a requirement for your solution. All that got blown out of the window somewhere around February last year, when we were all hit with the most massive change over time pretty much all of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. And there is no question now that every buying organization pretty much in the world has gone through a massive change over time in the last 12 months. So that's probably the biggest change in what I say to people that's happened in the last 20 years and is likely to happen in the next, hopefully, in our lifetimes. So changes over time when things change. What that means is, when things change, is we start questioning the status quo. Everybody right now is talking about how do we cope with the new normal. They are thinking, do I need to change what I do? And that's the key question in recognition of needs. Should I change? It usually starts with a problem. Does the new normal create problems or difficulties or concerns for me? And over time, that will develop into a requirement to do something about it. So it starts off of, are we happy with the new situation? Does that dissatisfy us in any way? Do we have any problems? And generally over a period of time, that matures into, we need to do something about it. And if we decide we need to do something about it, we then start looking at what the alternatives are. And we moved into this stage of the cycle called evaluation of options. And in evaluation of options, the key question is, what should I change to? Recognition of needs, should I change? Evaluation of options, what should I change to? If to use the example of moving house, this is when you go on to Zooplus, or in the olden days, go and visit the estate agents and start looking at what other properties are on the market that you might be interested in. In a business world, change into the evaluation of options is usually the point at which an inquiry into your organization would be triggered. If you get a phone call or an email from somebody saying, we're interested in talking to you about what you do, the chances are that organization has just started to move into evaluation of options. The significant thing is, when they reach that point, they have already had their requirements influenced by somebody who was active up here in recognition of needs. When you move into evaluation of options to buy a house, you know you want something that's probably got 4 bedrooms, that might be in a certain area, that might have a south-facing garden. Certain things, either your own past experience or other people, have influenced your requirements early in the cycle, so that as you move into evaluation of options, you're looking for solutions with a particular picture in your mind of what that might be. If you're familiar with the phrases proactive selling and reactive selling, proactive salespeople are active in recognition of needs. Reactive salespeople join the process in evaluation of options. So, should I change? What should I change to? And ultimately, what if it goes wrong? What we call resolution of concerns. As we get nearer to the decision, our attention moves away from what we want, what we need, and how we're going to meet it, and into what is the downside of making that decision. And this is why 40, now maybe 50% of decisions become decisions to do nothing. If concerns remain unresolved and you don't have to change, then you'll stay with the status quo. You won't buy anything at all. And that's what tends to happen. And the biggest problem with this phase of the cycle is it's not socially acceptable in a business context to say to a potential supplier, I'm scared about making a decision to buy from you. They won't tell you that. They just go quiet. If those of you who are involved in sales, if you've ever had a sale that was going really, really well, and then for no obvious reason, just stopped. They stopped answering your calls, the deadline for a decision slipped, issues that you thought were resolved and they came up again, then that's classic examples of resolution of concerns. And again, if they don't have to make a decision, they'll make a decision to do nothing. If they do have to make a decision, they will go for what they perceive to be the lowest risk option. And there are three alternatives. Some people will equate risk with cost, so they will buy the cheapest alternative solution. If you've ever lost a sale to a clearly inferior but cheaper solution, that's almost certainly because the customer had unresolved concerns. The second safe option, low risk option, is the existing supplier. If you're buying from somebody, have you bought from them before, you know what they can do, you have a degree of trust in what they do, they could be seen as a safe option. So if you're an existing supplier, this works in your favor. And finally, the other potentially low risk solution is the market leader. Those of you who worked in, if any of you worked in IT in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you'll have come across the expression, nobody got fired for buying IBM. It was out there, it was a truism, they were the safe option. Back in the days when buying an IT solution cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds, and was a massively high risk decision because technology was changing so quickly, IBM positioned themselves as the safe option, the safe pair of hands, and they built a whole sales strategy on that. So the three principal phases when we're making a buying decision, when we're selling, are: should I change? What should I change to? What if it goes wrong? And as salespeople, we're addressing those very different needs and requirements as we progress through the cycle. Sitting alongside that is this good old thing called negotiation, which is basically deciding the terms and conditions under which you can do business. Negotiation is different to selling. People will buy from you because you meet their needs. They will place an order with you because you can agree terms. The decision is made and we implement, the whole thing starts all over again. And in essence, the key to effective selling is getting all the decision makers to the decision point and favoring you at the same time. It's as simple as that. Do we have any questions so far?
I don't see any questions, Steve. They're all looking very quiet.
I have a question. Shall I put it in the chat or can I ask now?
You can ask.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve, you said on the decisions, you gave the three options customer could do, which is existing supplier, buy cheapest or market leader. Isn't there a fourth option of going with me as a new supplier?
No, that's the option we would like them to take. But that,
if I'm not cheapest,
they won't see that as a low risk option. That is the option we want them to go for. But we have to recognise we have to recognise they will have concerns about buying from us, and we'll have to address those, which is what we're going to move on and talk about. But yeah, that is the option we always want them to take, Lumen. Absolutely.
Of course, yeah. Thank you.
Anything else, Louise, or shall I move on?
Nothing else at the moment that I can see.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Sorry, excuse me. I do have one. Sorry. This starts from the assumption that we have visibility of what the customer or the person we're negotiating with is considering as options.
Yeah.
What is they don't have to tell us. So do you have any recommendations on how to achieve visibility on what are the options for the persons we're talking to?
Yeah, Sasha, what we're going to do now is look at those three, the recognition of needs, evaluation options, and resolution of concerns phases in more detail. And when we get to evaluation of options, we will address exactly that question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on then. Let's do that. Let's look at recognition of needs in a bit more detail. And what I want to do in the next 3 slides is look at each of these phases in a bit more detail. Look at what best practice, what the really effective sales organizations do at each phase in the cycle, and what typically happens at each phase in the cycle. We're not going to look at bad practice. We're not going to look at poor behavior, because frankly, if you were bad at what you do, you wouldn't be in this room right now. We're not interested in that. However, most of us, most of the time, will fit somewhere between typical and best. And I guess for you now, one of your personal reflection is, as we talk through these next 3 slides, is where do I or my organization fit between typical and best at each of these phases. So recognition of needs, this is a phase where the customer isn't actively in the market searching for new solutions, but they're thinking about it. So we need to be having this is where proactive selling is happening. So the first thing is we are proactive. We actually go out and look for people who might be wanting to buy from us. Your customers right now, your prospects right now are asking themselves, what does the new normal mean for me? Are you asking them the same question? Because you ought to be. Their potential to buy from you right now might be low. They might not be in a decision to buy something for another 3 or 6 or 9 months, but now is the time to be taught. They are now forming a new opinion of what a good solution looks like. You need to be influencing that. You need to be talking to them about what it is they want to do, so that you can make sure they realize you are better placed to meet their needs than anybody else. And particularly now, given how things have changed over the last 12 months, they may have needs that no one talked about before. There may be needs that only you can meet. Do you know what they are? And are you talking to potential customers about them? Because you should be. Don't wait for them to contact you. Go out, find people who could potentially talk to you. It's actually easier now with Zoom and with remote meetings, because at one time, driving for 2 or 3 hours to a discovery meeting that might come to nothing was actually quite a tough decision to make. It was expensive, it was time consuming, it was bad for the environment, but we did it. Those of us who worked in sales did it every day. Before I moved to Norfolk, I lived in Yorkshire. Most of my clients were either in the southeast of England or outside the UK. I used to jump in a car or jump on a plane to go for a 1 hour or 2 hour meeting that might lead to nothing. I can't see that ever coming back. Those calls will all happen now remotely via Zoom. So it's actually easier to do prospecting meetings, to do discovery meetings than it ever was before. So take advantage of it. Get on the phone, talk to people, use your emails, find out what your customer base are wanting now and moving into the future. Because there may be needs that only you can meet, which is great. There may be needs that nobody yet is meeting, which, if you have a development capability, is even better, because you can start developing needs ahead of the market. Is there a gap in the market? Is there a market in the gap? Can you satisfy it? That's the first stage. I often get into discussions with engineering organizations about what's more important, sales or research and development and engineering. And the answer is both. It's a sandwich. Your salespeople uncover needs and trends in the market. Your development team create solutions that meet those needs, and then your sales team take that back to the market. It's a sandwich. Sales, development, sales. And the two are absolutely interlinked. You can't have one without the other if you're going to be effective. So look for areas where there may, does the new normal mean there are needs out there that you can meet that aren't being met by anybody at the moment? Go out and find them. And build value for what makes you different. And value is entirely a buyer perception. It's not what you think it is, it's what it means for them. WIIFT, what is in it for them? What does your solution do that will make their life easier, better, happier, more effective, more efficient, more profitable, more creative, more environmentally sound, whatever it might be. What do they value, and how do you build value for what makes you special? And whilst everybody will tell you it's not about the competition, you don't knock the competition, you don't focus on the competition, that's absolutely true. But don't ignore them either. They are out there, and if they're good, they're doing exactly the same as you are. They are building needs for their competitive advantages, which may play against you. If you know you have a competitor whose solution is faster than yours, but not as reliable, you should be building value all the time for reliability. You want everybody, when they move into evaluation of options, to be saying, yes, we know that's fast, but it's more important that it's reliable. So you build differentiators for the things that you are good at. So that's what good looks like. That's what best practice looks like. Typically, if you have existing customers, you phone them up or you email them to say hello, you invite them to a webinar. If you ever get an email that says just touching base, chances are it goes straight in the bin. You're not interested in just touching base. You're far too busy to touch base with people just for the sake of it. Typically, most sales organizations, and sadly most organizations are typical, not best, they don't bother talking to people. These people aren't in the market. They're not coming to us asking for solutions. Therefore, we won't bother with them. And if you have a formal sales team with a sales management structure and sales directors, sales managers, sales people, the chances are the salespeople will almost be told, and don't waste your time on people who aren't ready to buy. It's not wasting your time. It's building the certainty of strong sales in the future. So typically people just sit there carrying on, waiting for the phone to ring or email to ping to say, yeah, we want to talk to you. Any questions on that one?
Nothing at the moment.
No. Okay, let's move on then. So, so the customers decided they want to do something. They may have been influenced by effective salespeople to this point. They're now moving to evaluation of options. So this is a point when everybody now gets involved, because this is when the customer goes to the market and says, we are interested in buying some, whatever it is, product, service, advice, whatever it might be. And most organizations get very excited. They have an inquiry. Wow, we can get busy. We can write a proposal. We can send we can do a presentation. We can do all sorts of really exciting things. We have a prospect. No. It's a huge effort, a huge resource, a huge amount of time and energy goes into creating a high quality bid. Don't do it unless there's a good chance you can win it. I work with a company called Advanced Sales Services. They have a qualifying tool called Scotsman, and their mantra is, if you're going to lose, lose quickly. You only lose a sale for two reasons. Either you are outsold, which is what this is all about, or you should never have been there in the first place, which is what this slide is all about. Don't bid for things that you're not going to win. It takes up a huge amount of time. And for us, again, if you have a formal sales organization, if you're a salesperson, going to your manager and saying, I'm busy on a bid, sounds great. And the manager goes to the sales director and says, my team are busy on a bid, sounds great. But if you're not going to win it, who are you fooling? A waste of time. Second thing is, get close to the customer. Quite often, particularly if you're dealing with larger organizations, particularly if you're dealing with governmental or quasi-governmental organizations, there will be a formal bid process. There will be an invitation to tender or a request for proposal that has a very formal structure. Ignore it. Get as close to the customer as you can. Quite often, in a formal structure, there'll be a clause somewhere that says, if you contact our organization outside of this structure, you will be disqualified from the bid process. I have only ever known that happen once. And I've spoken with literally thousands of bid teams, over literally thousands of bids. And only once have I known an organization stick to that threat and disqualify somebody for not having contact. If you have regular contacts within an organization, even if they're not part of the bid team, talk to them. They want to talk to you, you want to talk to them. And it comes back to the question that I was earlier, this is where you find out what's going on. So find out who's involved. Remember, 8 people potentially involved in that decision. Who are they? What is the process for making the decision? What are their requirements? How are they different? And I can't remember, somebody asked a question earlier, how do we get visibility? How do we find out what the customer is looking for? The answer is ask them. They will tell you. If you ask the question, what is important to you when you make that buying decision, why wouldn't they tell you? They want to make the right decision. They want to make an informed choice. So why would they not inform potential suppliers about what it is they're looking for? They might not tell you if they think you are better than somebody else or somebody else is better than you. That's fair enough. That's using their market knowledge as for negotiation leverage. But actually telling organizations what they want, they'll do that. They'll tell you. And they'll ask you what's most important. And again, going back to proactive selling versus reactive selling, proactive salespeople get what they're good at to be the things that are important when it comes to creating buying criteria. To go back to the example we used earlier, you said that reliability is more important than speed. Will that be one of your criteria when you make the buying decision? And they will say, yes, it will. And you've created a buying criteria that you can meet, ideally, that your competitors can't. So analyze decision criteria, find out what people want by asking them. And remember, different people will want different things. So ask as many people as possible. Don't rely on one contact for their view, because it might not be everybody's view. And again, think of that in the context of what your competitors might be doing. Because again, to go back to that example, your competitor, if they're any good, will be emphasizing speed over quality. And you need to mitigate that if you can. This is a phase when you will be making presentations or proposals. This is when you start talking about your solution. Back here in recognition of needs, you've been talking about what they want, their requirements. Now you're talking about, this is how we can do what you've told us you want. So it's very much going out. And here's where this is, for me, the 4 most important words in business to business selling. It's not about you. It isn't about what your solution does. It's about what it gives to the customer, what value they get from having it. What are their business outcomes that are resolved by having your solution? What problems do you solve? What consequences of those problems do you mitigate? What value do you deliver? That's what's important, not the nuts and bolts of your solution. And 9 times out of 10, when I see a presentation and I see a proposal, it's 80% solution focused. Here's what we do. Here's what we've got. Here's what we can do. Here's where we are. Blah, 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 blah. They're not interested. They don't care. All they're interested in is what it does for them. If it meets our needs, if it delivers more value than anybody else, and the value the value it delivers outweighs the cost of getting it, then chances are we're going to buy from you. Then you need
questions. Sorry, Steve.
Sorry.
We've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so Hannah asks, but you can lose the sale based on external factors, surely, things outside our control, like a pandemic and resulting redundancies and amended budgets, etc.
Absolutely. This is assuming that the process isn't being derailed by external factors, which there are, and it's always been the case. Budgets get cut, companies get acquired. There will be situations where the whole cycle gets broken by an external factor. And if that happens, it happens. And yes, you may get, if you're unlucky and you've invested a lot of time and effort into a bid, and then that happens. I'm afraid that is just the way of the world. So yes, sadly, no, you're right. Was it Hannah? You asked that.
It was
Sorry, Hannah.
Hannah.
Sometimes those things do happen.
And Karen asks, and this is a question that I would like to ask as well. If most touching base or emails and contact is typically ignored and the sales cycle is so long, how would you suggest keeping in the forefront of customers' minds? And so when the need does arise, they think of your company. I can't read today either. Did you get that?
It comes back to value. The question I would say I'd ask of any sales manager when they're preparing for any contact with a customer, that what is the value that you're going to give to that customer, and what is the value you're going to get from that transaction? And unless you can answer both parts of that question, you shouldn't be making the contact. So if you have, for example, if you speak to an organization and they tell you something that they've discovered or something they're thinking about as a result of the pandemic, and you think that's a really good, interesting insight, and if it's not confidential, why wouldn't you share that insight with other people, with your other prospects? So having a good reason to contact them. I've just had this fantastic conversation with somebody. I'd like to share it with you. I think you'd find it interesting, and however you paraphrase that into a subject line is how I would make that approach. So I need to talk to you about diversity. I need to talk to you about sustainability, whatever it is that's come up that you think actually this is worth talking to that other customer about, so that when they see that subject line, they think, oh, that's interesting. So putting something in that subject line that potentially has value for that customer, because that's what you have to. The customer has to value that interaction with you to go ahead with it. And the busier they are, the more value it needs to have. They're not going to waste their time on casual conversations. So give them a good reason for wanting to talk to you, basically. So
that's great. Thank you. That's it for the moment. I'm saying it's 11:40 as well.
Yeah,
I don't know where the time goes.
We've only one more slide, and it's just short stuff.
Okay.
So thank you, Louise. Yeah. So it's all about. It's not about you. It's making it about the customer. If you have a template for your proposal, if you have a template for your sales presentation, throw it away. It shouldn't be about you. It should start with what the customer wants, what they need, and then only after you've got that clear and absolutely nailed down and absolutely communicated back to the customer, and then do you say, and this is how we do it. So it's almost an appendix, the bit about what you can do. Everything else is about them. Again, typical behavior, bid for everything. We've already talked about the temptation of doing that. Accepting the bid document or bid process on face value. We've talked about that. Ignoring other suppliers. And as we've said, being self-centered, making your proposals all about you. If you have a marketing department or you have a product development team and product managers, in some ways that's great, but they really do fail on this last hurdle. They make life hard for you as salespeople, because they will give you all the good stuff about what you can do, which isn't what it's about at all. The final phase of the cycle, resolution of concerns. What if it goes wrong? As we said, somebody said earlier, what we're trying to do is to get them to buy from you, despite the fact you might be the highest risk option or a higher risk option. The first thing to do is accept that if you are a new supplier or it is a new solution, there will be concerns. It's very easy when we're excited about our solutions to think, why on earth would they not want to buy it? They're bound to want it. It's fantastic. But they won't see it like that. It's new, it's different, it's untried. There will be concerns. So if you know they're going to be concerns, don't wait to the last minute. Don't wait for them to come up to try and deal with them. Handle them early, pre-handle them. If you think somebody's going to be worried about your track record, introduce them to an existing customer the first chance you get. Don't wait till they're saying, because they won't ask you until they get here. When they get to the end, they'll say, well, have you got a reference site I can talk to? Don't wait for them to ask you. Tell them back here, early in the cycle. And of course, you can talk to this company over here, that company over there, who'll gladly explain to you what the work we're doing with them. So you've identified the problem early. You've got rid of it. It ceases to be a problem. It ceases to be a concern once you've handled it, and if you can handle it early. If you do get them, and remember, they're not going to tell you they're worried about buying from you. They're just going to start ignoring you or delaying the decision. So if that starts to happen, recognize it for what it is. That chances are, if the sale suddenly becomes derailed and you're looking for anomalies, you're looking for inconsistencies. If people start behaving inconsistently, the chances are that means they have concerns. So recognize it, acknowledge it. You say to somebody, you know, you said you were going to make the decision in March, it's now the middle of April. Has something happened? Is there something going on that you haven't been able to tell me about? Get them to open up and say, you know, yeah, well, actually, it is a big decision and we're not sure about your track record. That's fine. Once you know, you can do something about it. So help them resolve it. Nobody can resolve a concern for somebody else. You can't stop somebody else from worrying. What you can do is help them resolve it. What do we need to do to make you feel comfortable proceeding with us, going ahead with this decision? Get them to tell you what they need and help them to get it. Typical behavior, assume there won't be any concerns. We're great, the solution's fantastic, it's brand new, everybody will want it. No. Ignore or minimize them. Don't worry about it is the most unpersuasive thing you can possibly say. Yet we say it all the time. There's very few things in sales where the intuitive behavior isn't the most effective behavior. 9 times out of 10, doing what your gut tells you to do is the right thing to do. This is one of the exceptions. You know, your instinct is, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, come on, make the decision, you know, trust me, I'm a consultant. Doesn't work. You need to be a little bit more circumspect than that. You need to go back into it and say, tell me what it is, tell me what it is that's bothering you, so we together can do something about it. And again, the classic, and you've all experienced it at some stage, we've only got one left in stock, I can only keep this price till the end of the week, it's going up next week, we haven't got many left, we can't get any more because of Brexit, whatever the reason is, you get pressured into making a decision. What happens? When somebody puts pressure on you to make a decision, do you say, yeah, all right, then I'll have one? Or do you say, no, I'll think about it? It drives people away from decisions, not towards them. So, that's it from
We have a question.
Any question?
We do, from Mark. How do you decide which prospects not to bid for? If you're very busy or not got much on, should this affect the decision? How do you decide which prospects not to go for?
My answer to that, Mark, is if you are not very busy, it's very tempting to go for everything. But the question then is, what happens if you get busy halfway through the bid with something that is better? The answer to that really is, think about what your perfect customer looks like, or what your perfect's the wrong word. What are the baselines that a company must have to be a good prospect, and decide those in isolation. Don't decide those when you have a deal on the table, because I guarantee you will make the criteria fit the deal that's on the table, so you can justify bidding for it. But so when you haven't got a lot happening, sit down and say, what has to be in place for us to want to bid? You know, do we have uniqueness? Do we have relationships? Can we meet their needs? Do they have the sort of budget we need to make it viable? So think about what your criteria might be, your qualifying criteria, in isolation. Do that cold, and then apply that rigorously to a bid and say, does it meet our criteria? If it does, then yes. If it doesn't, then you have to ask the question, is there a strategic reason why we should bid for this anyway? If a company comes to you and they're really big, they're a really significant potential customer who you'd love to do business with, you might say, well, actually, I'm going to bid for this, even though I'm not going to win it, because it will strengthen and deepen my relationship with that organization. So there might be a strategic reason for bidding for something, even if you can't win it. But if there isn't that, then unless you really, really need the practice, find something else.
I hope that answers your question.
Well, if anybody needs to re-ask that question,
yeah,
please do.
That sounded really derogatory. I hope you didn't.
No.
Sorry about that.
The questions usually create more questions, Louise. That's all.
I've got a question from Julian. How do you get the customer to involve the right people in the organisation, the decision-making process, so that their collective concerns can be addressed?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
First of all, it's find out who is involved, who's actively involved in the process. You can't actively get other individuals. Let's say there's somebody in the organisation you would really like to be involved in the decision, but they're not directly involved in the decision. It's unlikely you can change that. However, you can use that person as a champion. You can ask that person to sell internally on your behalf, and you do that by asking them the sorts of questions that you want them to ask of the people who are involved in the decision. So you wouldn't say, look, if you buy this solution from us, you will save this, this, and this. You say to your contact, if you buy this solution from us, what would you save? So that they can then go to the decision makers and say, they don't say, well, I've spoken to Steve and he says we can save this, this, and this, because the decision makers are going to say, well, he's a salesperson, he would say that. They go to the decision makers and say, I've given this some thought and I think we can save this, this, and this. So it's an internal reason, it's an internal sponsor who's working on your behalf, influencing the decision makers. So identify who is actively involved in the decision, identify who isn't actively involved in the decision, but supports you, and rehearse them and cultivate them and equip them to sell on your behalf internally.
Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful thing to ask people, actually. I can think of scenarios where we might do that.
Mm.
Sasha has another question. When it comes to make versus buy psychology, where make is an option, as in it's homemade versus depending on someone else to supply it, is the convincing process always that logical, or are there some stories from the field to address the more emotional or cultural aspects of the question?
That's another great question, because do it yourself, make is a competitor, and you should treat it as it's exactly the same as another potential supplier. It's a question of looking at what are the strengths of that option, what are the weaknesses of that option, and comparing yourself against them. Classically, a homemade option may take longer. It may, if the individuals you are talking to are themselves involved in creating that solution, it may carry more risk. You may be able to play that what if it goes wrong card.
But is there some behavioral bias to address? Because you speak of it in a very logical way, as in sort of almost objective metrics of it's longer, it's more expensive or less expensive, or this and that, which is fine, which makes logical sense. Now, behavioral economics is a thing nowadays, and experiments proving that people are loss averse, or people might be having a bias of favoring what they think is theirs or something like that. So, is there beyond the logical mind, are there some behavioral biases that do you have any anecdotes or any advice on behavioral biases on that front?
You're absolutely right, Sasha. There are indeed, and personal needs as opposed to business needs. And again, it's a question of treating them in the same way, but looking out for them. So what is it? What is it? So what's important? You may ask the question, what's important to your organisation about doing this? But you could also ask the question, what's important to you personally about doing this? So yeah, you need to have that level of trust and relationship to be able to ask that kind of question, but ask the question, what is important to you personally? Or again, if there's somebody who's pivotal in the decision that you don't have that level of relationship with, does one of your existing contacts know them? Can they give you an insight? So this person over here, person B, is really vital to the decision. What do you think is really driving their thinking about making this decision?
Okay.
So yes, you're absolutely right. There are definitely personal biases. There are definitely personal needs, but the same rules sort of apply. You just have to be open enough. It's harder because it predicates upon you having that relationship with them.
So yeah, so it comes back to the closeness and the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. The closer you are, the easier it is to ask the question. But you can ask it remotely if it's somebody who's removed from you, and hopefully your contacts have an accurate perception.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We've got a question from Luma. What is the best approach for seeking new opportunities? How to approach the potential customer?
Well, it's very contextual. So it depends on a lot of circumstances. The real question, I guess, the question is, what is it? The first thing is to know what your solution does or has that has real value in your potential market. So what does your solution really deliver that's different and special and beyond what else is out there? And then the second question is, who is likely to have that requirement? And I almost say, imagine if you were on a Zoom call or you met somebody in a cafe or out somewhere and you got chatting to them and you said, what is it you do? And what they told you made you think, this is my perfect prospect. Capture that. What is it? What does somebody need to say that would make you think this is my perfect prospect? And then say, okay, what set of circumstances would create that entity? What market would it be in? Where would they be in their maturity as an organization? Where would they be economically? Where they be geographically? And those are the things that build your marketing, call it a persona. You build that persona of your perfect ideal prospect. And basically you go looking for it. You go looking for it there. You wouldn't, you don't go searching for things where they wouldn't exist. You find where they exist, and that's where you do your research. That's where you go onto the social media channels. That's where you join the like-minded chat rooms and groups, so you can see what's going on and who's out there doing stuff.
I mean, I can echo that actually, because I'm a rubbish salesperson, but some of the best sales we've ever made has been sort of at recruitment fairs where we've been there with our stand representing our members and things, but actually there've been other people there who have then turned into potential members because they didn't realize we did that, and we were in the same pool, the same hall, if you like.
You were in the right space at the right time.
We weren't selling at all. We were just there in the room.
Good, excellent.
So have we got any other questions for Steve while he's at your disposal? Gone quiet again. I think it's such a good subject though, isn't it? And it just comes back to the personal relationships, I think, over and over again. Yeah.
The stronger the relationships, the easier it becomes. The more depth you can have, the more intimacy you can have. It just becomes so much easier. The better you know the people. And at the end of the day, sales is about it's persuasion for commercial gain.
Yeah.
It's an interpersonal thing. It's not a business skill. It's an interpersonal skill, and we all have it. I don't accept that you're a rubbish salesperson, Louise.
Thank you.
I don't accept that at all.
I'm anti. Oh, Richard's raised his hand. Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, Louise, thanks. Steve, one thing I continually grapple with is, that the contact will have a business requirement at some point along the way, particularly in the startup world, that it's funding related or it's event driven and so on. And I'm continually grappling with how often do you ping people? How often, or do you just leave them live for a little bit and look out for events? What's your thought there?
I can't give you a time frame because it depends very much.
No.
But it comes back to the earlier question about if you have a reason for contacting them that could potentially add value to them, then do it. And as long as it's not sort of ridiculously 4 times a day, as often as you can get away with a legitimate reason for contacting them would be my answer to that. Which it's tedious sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I monitor events like this, and I monitor regular newsletters and so on. Say, oh, I saw this. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a question of, and certain events might trigger things. If you know there's going to be a funding round being announced, that might be a good time to reach out to people just before it goes out, or talk to all the accountants. They know what's going on all the time.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Rachel, did you want to say anything else before we will wrap up?
So yeah, that's great, Steve. So I think, yeah, just to go on to the kind of summaries, a couple of slides there, just to kind of wrap up for everybody. So yeah, great to have the interaction there. And yeah, really good questions. I think quite often we ask a question, other people are thinking the same thing. So it's really good to get that sort of backwards and forwards dialogue, and some great answers there from Steve as well. Just to summarise, clearly, as I've mentioned, overview of US2U Consulting, you know, been around for a while. I think Steve's given you a flavour of how our advice was very practical. Clearly, our goal is to always work with organisations, a very practical way to help make that positive difference. And then finally, the final slide coming through is around our contact details. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you've got my details on the screen there. Again, if you'd like to get in touch with Steve to continue the dialogue and the conversation, you've got his email and his mobile number on there. And indeed, if you'd like to see some more of Steve, you can go onto the US2U Consulting website, where under news and events, you'll see earlier this year, Steve and I made a podcast, again, of me interrogating about some of his sales strategies and sales advice. You've got the podcast as well there. So do have a look at the website going forward as well.